Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Day for Adventure, the premier outdoor podcast that will get you off your butt and outside. I'm Ben.
I'm Will.
And I'm Trevor.
And for this episode, we will be talking about how to plan meals for a weekend camping trip. So, I know it sounds boring, it sounds dull, but why would we be teaching or talking about meal planning and meal preparation? The simplest answer is you have to eat on any trip you go on, whether it's a short one or a weekend or even a couple of weeks long. You got to be able to have food in your stomach so that you can keep on going. And preferably, that food should be relatively nutritious, should be relatively filling, should actually taste somewhat good, and just overall satisfying. Because I'll tell you right now, if there's one thing that is better than anything else at the end of a really tough day, it's a really good meal.
Yep. And before you decide to plan your meals, there are a few things you want to consider. The first and obviously the most important is how many people you're cooking for, as no one wants to go hungry, and we also don't want to end up having more food than people. Additionally, you want to be able to cook that food, so keep in mind of what type of cooking equipment you're bringing along. If you're not bringing anything, be prepared to do those no-cook lunches and no-cook meals. If you have a lovely camp kitchen, then you can prepare what you want. And if you just have a backpacking stove, you need to be able to just use meals like in boiled water. In addition, you want to focus on the general climate, as in warmer weathers, some things will melt and it's harder to keep certain perishables. And in the cold, it may be harder to properly eat things that have some sort of caramel or molasses as they freeze and harden.
Another thing that you got to consider is how big your portions are, for two main reasons. One, you don't want to overbuy food and then just waste money on food. Also, you don't want to underbuy food and not have enough to eat. And then you also don't want to have food waste, where say you make spaghetti and then you have like 3 servings of spaghetti left over. Because if you're in somewhere like Philmont, it's a big worry that if you just have food lying around, that bears are going to come out. Or really anywhere you go camping, there's always a worry of animals coming and eating your extra food waste. So when you plan out portion sizes and you can control your portions, you won't have that food waste and you'll have enough to eat for the entire week. And
so now that we've got all that information out of the way, let's start actually talking about actually prepping meals. So, of course, we'll start off with the first meal of the day. Some may consider it to be the most important meal of the day, and that is breakfast. So, there is a lot of commentary on how to create the best camping breakfast. And there's a large debate that always kind of goes around, which is the idea of cook versus no cook. For those of you who maybe aren't well aware, the idea is you have to kind of balance the idea between having a cooked meal that you gather the ingredients for, you cook, you make it warm, it's awesome, or the other option is you can just have a bunch of granola bars or something like that. Personally, it all comes down to personal preference. It all comes down to what you're doing, what type you want to go for. So if you are, for example, if you are hiking 100 miles through the Rocky Mountains or something to that extent, for example, you probably don't want to be cooking in the morning because you already have so many other things going on. You probably don't want to cook in the morning because at that point in time is precious, because otherwise it'll be too hot to hike by the time you get out. There's all sorts of good reasons why not to cook a breakfast, but there's also a lot of reasons why to cook a breakfast. Cooked breakfasts tend to be a bit more overall more nutritious, if you will. They tend to be a lot more morale boosting. It's a good way to start your day. I mean, think about it. On weekdays, for example, you probably at home probably sit there and you get up in the morning, you're half groggy, you haven't had your coffee. You make your,
eggs, just eggs.
Eggs, sure, yeah. That's a pretty good pick-me-up on a Friday or Saturday, or a Sunday morning or something like that. But on like a weekday, what do? You just go and pour some cereal or something like that. And you're like, okay, it's done. I'm done. It took me 5 minutes to eat. But does that really get you up in the morning and you're like, I want to keep going, right? Or does a cooked meal do that better for you? So you have to kind of gauge that out. If you're just kind of hanging out, I'd recommend you cook a meal. If you've got stuff to do, I'd recommend you just pull some granola bars. That's kind of just a common rule about that.
And no matter what you're doing, you'll want to keep it simple. As Ben said, you get up, you're kind of groggy, it takes some time to really get going. A simple meal, whether you cook it or you don't, allows you to just kind of get right into the process. So for a cooked breakfast, especially if you're starting out, something as simple as boiling some water for some oatmeal, or quickly making some scrambled eggs and you throw in some vegetables in it and cook it all together. You don't want things that are overly complex. You just kind of want things that you can cook and clean quickly and then get right to the adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about this cooking versus no cooking, I have a great example. So a little bit of backstory. At Devil's Lake, so one of the state parks in Wisconsin, every year they have one weekend where troops and venture crews and Girl Scout, no, those are troops as well. Yeah, all of the scouting programs come together and they do a big hike. And I've gone with both my Boy Scout troop and my venture crew, and they both do breakfasts completely opposite of each other. So my troop always cooks on a Saturday morning with the idea of getting up early, cooking usually eggs or pancakes. That's always our go-to. So we have energy for this full day hike that we have. And then Sunday, we do no cooking. It's just like our milk and our cereal so we can get up, clean right away, and get out of camp. Whereas my venture crew, our Saturdays are no cooking. So it'd be our milk and our cereal so we can get out on the trail right away. And then Sunday, some poor soul, usually me, has to wake up at 3 or 4 a.m., crack a ton of eggs, mix in some meat and some potatoes and stuff, put it in a slow cooker, basically, turn that on and let it run. So on Sunday morning, everyone has a great breakfast and they're all happy so we can clean up and get out.
Now, that philosophy is the exact opposite of what our troop always used to do. And I like to kind of bring in just like the idea of keeping it simple. So a really great example of what is not simple is something we used to make in our troop all the time. William, you will remember this. It was called Iron Man. So it's simple in theory, but in practice it's not. So what it is it's essentially eggs mixed in with potatoes, peppers, sausage, or like breakfast sausage, a ton of butter, tons of grease. And they always tried pulling all the guys that came well before William and I would always say, oh, this is the heartiest breakfast you'll ever have, right? But it would every single year when we go to Devil's Lake, we would always have to have this, and it would take us 2 hours to make that breakfast. So we wouldn't ever get on the trails until 9 o'clock. And by then, everybody's walked on the trails and you're already way behind. And, you've missed half your day just by sitting around. Is that a good thing to do when you're just kind of hanging out and you're just hanging out with the boys or with your friends or whatever? Yeah, sure, it is. But when you're trying to get something done, no, that is not a good choice.
I will give a few tricks for Iron Man, as since we've aged out, I have done that cooking on my own in a kitchen, and the biggest way to save time is to use frozen sausage and use pre-made hash browns, as that cuts the cooking time in half. It's still not something you want to do on your first attempt, but if you've gotten good at meals, which I think is a kind of a separate thing, if you don't have a big schedule, that's the perfect time to experiment. But when you are doing a more hectic adventure, getting a meal that is something you have done before and you can knock out makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, I've done Iron Man actually at home a couple times, and I've used a couple of those little tactics you just were saying there. Now, the thing is, Iron Man, if you cook it properly, it is probably one of the best breakfasts you'll ever have in your whole life. But only if it's cooked properly. Again, it's pretty easy. People are surprised how easy it is to screw up eggs. It's so simple, and yet so difficult to make really, really good eggs. So you have to kind of gauge that. So again, it's a great pick me up in the morning, and if you got a ton of downtime, it's definitely a great option. But if you don't have the time, or you need to get on the road, or you need to get on the hike, or you got something else going on in the morning, I can guarantee you getting an extra hour of sleep and making yourself oatmeal is perfectly fine. This all being said, what is, of course, the purpose of breakfast? Well, the answer is it's fueling yourself for your day. So does it need to be something complex? No, it doesn't. It shouldn't. What are you looking for? Well, you're looking for mostly carbohydrates, maybe some protein, preferably at least a small amount of protein in it if you can. But you definitely want to have carbohydrates, and a pretty large portion of it. That's your quick burn energy. That's the stuff that gets you running in the morning. Your protein will pretty much give you a little longer period of time. So you have to kind of balance those two things. Sugars, energy. Okay, that's the idea. It is a fuel. Breakfast is fuel. It's what gets you started in the morning. It's what gets you out there. And of course, William, you made the comment about cleanup, right? Or was that Trevor?
I believe that was Will.
All right. Well, cleanup. Keep it really simple. Again, Iron Man is a terrible example of something to do, okay? It is the most complicated cleanup I've ever seen. If you make it good, you probably made it in cast iron. And if you made it in cast iron, it ain't clean and easy. So you don't. Just avoid that if you've got stuff going on.
So I got one good example, and then we'll wrap up breakfast. If you want a quick, easy, actually, I think it's really good. Some people have made fun of me for it, but Best Quick, I think's the brand. Anyway, they make these little yellow packages. They're little plastic containers of pancake mix that all you have to do is add water to them. It's like 3 cups of water or something like that. You shake it in the container, and then you can pour it right onto a griddle and make pancakes out of it. So the only thing you have to clean is the plates that you ate it off of and whatever griddle you use. And if you just buy that in syrup, that's a whole breakfast right there. And it's fast, easy, and tastes good. And you can throw like fruit on it if you want.
Or you can throw bacon around it.
You could throw bacon around it too, yeah.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good idea. We never really did that in Boy Scouts, or in our troop, but
we literally either did those pancakes or breakfast or garbage plate, which is similar to your Iron Man, but it doesn't sound as complicated. I don't know. It's just meat, potatoes, and eggs, and then you mix it all into one pot before serving it. Yeah. So you have like 4-ish dishes to clean.
Yeah, maybe one day we might. Maybe one day we'll do something on breakfast in general. But yeah, it's breakfast. Keep it simple. Keep it easy. You could choose whether to cook it or not cook it. Just gauge that to the adventure you're going on.
Yeah, and so we were talking about keeping breakfast easy. Lunch can be even easier for the main fact that I'm going to again base it off the Devil's Lake trip. You are hiking when you have lunch. So the easiest way to do it is just have no cooking. What we always did was we made sandwiches. We threw some snacks in there, usually some fruit. Packaged cookies are super popular as well. Just other small things like that. And you put them in your little lunchbox or your little paper sack, and you throw that in your backpack because then you can carry that with you, and then you can eat lunch at any point on the trail that you want. If we say keep breakfast simple, then it's keep lunch even simpler. Yes, that's English. But another big thing is to make sure whatever you bring for lunch, it is going to be in your backpack. So try not to let it get smashed. Like we had bananas one year, and some kid decided to put his lunch at the bottom of his backpack, and he had bananas all over his bag. So either get a nice lunchbox with like little plastic linings inside of them that keep them square, or put it at the top of your bag.
A few things in general that tend not to pack well are bananas and berries because they'll smash, or fresh bananas and berries. Traditional bread can get smushed. So if you're making sandwiches, keep them at the top of your pack. If you're using crackers or chips, that type of thing, usually, again, either keep them at the top or they will get smashed. For some easier ones, granola bars and jerky are easy to throw into side pockets. And if you want something in your main bag, stuff like trail mix or dried fruit can get smushed without really ruining the lunch, essentially.
Yeah, a big thing, having what almost some people would consider snacks as lunch is totally normal. Both times I've been to two different national high adventure bases in scouting, and our lunches sometimes have consist of the main meal being a bag of beef jerky, and then we have some trail mix thrown in there, Oreos or combos sometimes. I think that was one of the lunches at Philmont, and they just come in little bags, and usually it's towards the top because you don't want to take out your entire contents of your bag when you're hiking. But a lot of times your lunch will be almost these snacks because a downside of sandwiches is they have the bread that gets smashed, but they also have meat, so like deli meat. So if you don't keep them cold, like if it's a long period of time like Philmont where it's weeks, if you don't keep it cold, they go bad. Now if it's just your general, I'm going to hike for about 4 hours and then eat it, you'll be fine. Another fun thing I've learned from my second time at Philmont, don't put pickles on your sandwich. They had them. I like pickles, so I put it on my sandwich and my bread was soaked.
I've had that happen a few times to me. So one thing I just to add one thing, I don't remember if you guys said it but one thing I've seen, I've never done this before, but one thing I've seen that sometimes people who really like to make their lunch more extravagant because they have to have a taste of home every time they go out somewhere, bringing, what do they call it? Like the Ziploc, not Ziploc bags, but the Ziploc containers, the
plastic containers,
hard frame plastic containers, like the really hard framed ones. And then they can put things like, Tupperware. That's what they call them. Duh. And people will put all sorts of things in there for hikes. I've seen some pretty interesting ones, mostly online, and some people who are being show-offy, but you'll see everything from people who just put a sandwich in there or a couple of sandwiches in there, or maybe put their entire lunch in that container because it just makes it really easy to store. You can store it wherever you want. That's kind of the thing. You can put a banana in there. You can put berries in there as long as you have them in a hard container. That being said, harder containers are heavier, but, who cares? An extra pound doesn't ever hurt. Said no one ever. So there's that, but I've seen like those kind of simple things that people literally bringing sushi with them. Like it's insane, but it's a really kind of a smart way. If it's a square kind of container, fun fact, this kind of goes into something we'll talk about probably later on in another podcast, but square things store way better than round things. So if you can have a square container, that will store way better in a bag or something like that. So that's something to consider maybe for your food.
Yeah, and then moving a little on from lunch. So we talked about sometimes lunches will be just snacks, but then the next thing is pocket snacks is what I like to call them. And that's when you're hiking and either it can be little leftovers from lunch or specific things you pack. And sometimes you can either keep them in a very accessible spot in your backpack, but if you're, say, at Philmont where taking off your backpack is a hassle, you literally keep snacks in your pocket. So while you're hiking, if you get hungry, you just pull out your little pack of Oreos and you snack on some Oreos while hiking. And that came with the great phrase that I learned that pocket snacks are not a joke. So if you're the kind of person that gets hungry even after eating, throw a few pocket snacks in with your pack or in your pocket. So
yeah, my kryptonite is with pocket snacks is definitely fruit snacks. I am a small child with fruit snacks. Okay, William will attest to that.
Yeah,
I'm trying to ignore the pile of fruit snacks wrappers that is right next to me.
For me, it's Laura bars or trail mix.
Trail mix
Trevor.
is good. I'm sorry, Laura bars and me
man, don't diss the Laura bars.
Have a love-hate relationship, and the only love part is I got hungry, so I ate some. But I've had the
Lard
peanut
bars
butter
are
and jelly
life.
ones, and that's almost it. Some of the other ones don't look bad, but I've just been ruined by the peanut butter and jelly Lara bars that I can't even anymore.
It's a shame.
I don't think it's a shame.
Anyways, at the very end of your camping experience could be the creme de la creme, dinner. This is usually your show-offy piece and is almost always cooked. Even in backpacking, unless you're exhausted, you're likely going to at least boil a little bit of some water to make a hot meal. Now, the big trick when starting out with meals is the idea of a one-pot meal, in which you put and cook everything in one pot, because one pot meal. For example, one way you would use some sort of starch, so instant rice, noodles, that type of thing, and then you'd have your protein. This could be a ready-to-use chicken or a packaged fish, and you throw that in.
Those little pre-cooked sausage tube link things that come in a horseshoe. Those are good.
Mm-hmm. Those are really. Aren't those kielbasa? Is that kielbasa?
I have no idea.
It might have. I don't know. I don't know what the deal with that is, but those are really good to have.
Yeah. Sometimes some dried vegetables and then some sort of sauce. This could be everything as simple to a homemade sauce you brought, or just a simple cheese powder that you throw in to make some cheesy rice.
There's a lot of very, very, very good options for dinners. You could do everything. The truth is, you can do anything you really want for dinners. One pot meals are, I think, for what we, all three of us, generally do when we camp. One pot meals work really well for us. But some of us are also more the kind of leisurely campers, and I'm sure somebody would love to have some grilled food. Putting a fire on and cooking some burgers over the top of a fire, or hot dogs, or brats, or sausage, or whatever you want to call them, it's a really good option as well. Of course, you got to kind of make sure that you get them up to heat and those kind of things, but that's another option.
Another good one that I really like, and my troop did all the time, is what's called a hobo meal. The best ones I remember is we had the little frozen burger patties. You put that in, you cut up some potatoes, you put that in. You really just put anything that you want in there. A little dollop, I think, of cream of potato, cream of chicken soup, just some corn, and all those like little general things. And it's all in your tin foil. You wrap it up tight and fold it up a few times to make sure that nothing like leaks out. You write your name on it in Sharpie, and you put it in the coals of the fire and let it sit. It really depends on what you put in. If you put potatoes in, it sits forever. And then you flip it over, let it sit again, and then you take it out, peel it off, and you just set your little tinfoil on your plate, and you open that up, and you just eat right out of there, and it's some of the best stuff I've ever had.
Yeah, I've had that before. I will actually highly recommend that, actually, as a possible first time meal plan. It's really good to do when you're in a group, by the way. If you've got like 4 or 5 or 6 people on your trek, and you've got a couple people who are maybe picky or aren't really the kind of people that want to eat what everybody else is eating because reasons, or if you have dietary restrictions, I'll tell you, those hobo meals, or those kinds of more solo kind of meals, are really, really good. So one pot's really good for if you're either in a really, really large group or in a really small group. The hobo meals, the more individualized meals, I think are really good to have when you're kind of in a medium-sized group and you kind of are at the point at the night where you're just like, yeah, I don't really want to deal with like actually cooking or anything. So that's a really good option. One thing actually I'm surprised nobody's mentioned is freeze-dried meals. So freeze-dried, there's a couple advantages and disadvantages to freeze-dried meals. So first of all, for those of you who don't know what freeze-dried meals are, they're essentially like, get these kind of meals from places like Mountain House, where it's a meal in a bag where you have all your stuff on the inside, and it acts as a one-pot meal, where you basically pour hot water over the top of it, close the bag for 5 to 20 minutes, depending on what you're cooking, and the water will soak up into the freeze-dried food, and then it's palatable. Now, pros to that are it's really simple, it's really easy, and if you are coming out of a really, really tough day, it is probably one of the easiest ways to make a meal that will actually taste somewhat decent. The cleanup is really simple unless you throw it into a pot. All you got to do is just close the bags and throw it away the next time you get an opportunity. But I will mention that there is two big cons. First of all, freeze-dried food does not always taste very good because it sometimes tastes freezer burnt. I've never really seen that or experienced that personally, but other people have way better taste buds than I do. The second part of that is it's actually quite a bit more expensive. It's like the equivalent, a freeze-dried meal can sometimes cost more than going to like McDonald's to get a full course meal at McDonald's. Okay, so that means like we're talking 10 to 15 bucks for a freeze-dried meal for two people. So it's a little bit pricey.
Another positive I want to throw in there is they last a while, and they're pretty light because a lot of weight from things come from the water contents inside of them. So they last forever in your bag. Most of them can get smashed up and still be pretty fine.
Oh, and they're pretty compact too.
Yeah, they're quite compact anyway. But I do have to agree they taste quite bland. I would invest in a little spice wheel if you plan to do all freeze-dried food. That's what we did for my Apostle Islands trip. We had all freeze-dried food because the camp paid for it. And then we just bought a spice wheel as well.
Big thing is that with a lot of these meals, you have so many different options of cooking and with setting up your food that it's a good idea to just experiment with your cooking style in each individual campouts. When you have time to fail, you'll be able to succeed when it counts.
Yeah, and now that we've talked about meals and given you some suggestions of things you can cook, another important thing you have to plan for is who's going to buy the food, who's going to cook the food, and who's going to prep the food. That was a little out of order, but so the best thing to do, this comes straight out of my troop, is after you decide what meals you're going to have, list off the ingredients that you need for that, give that to what's called your grubmeister, and that's just the person that goes out, buys the food, brings it to camp with them. And then we have little cooking schedules. So we have like cook 1 and cook 2, and one of them's prep and one of them's cook, depending on the meal. And then we also have people that are assigned for cleanup as well. So those are just things that you should always think of. Now, once you get further along, and if you keep camping with the same people, we've gotten plenty of times where we've only assigned a grubmeister, and then as we're camping, we just know who's good at cooking what, and who also just wants to cook that night, and that's pretty easy. And then whoever doesn't cook has to clean up, and that's what it just comes down to. So let's talk about some of the common mistakes. I mentioned the first one a little earlier, is buying either too much or too little of food. Again, I think that goes back to the planning. It's easy just to, when you're planning food, say you're doing the pancake one where you just add water to the mixture. On the little bottle things, they'll say about how many servings it is. So if you know you're going with 5 people, that's going to take either one of the big ones or 2 of the smaller ones. That's kind of how our patrol did it. And we'd know that would be enough food for us. So basing things just off servings, like on the box, is probably one of the best ways to go. But also some of those servings are just like your standard general ones. So there are people that eat less and there's people that eat more. So you also just have to know your group when you're planning for it. The next one is improper storage. So that would be kind of like when we talked about when you were with your lunch. If you throw it on the bottom of your bag and you have bananas in just a paper bag, it's going to probably get smashed. So you just want to make sure that you store things well, especially if you have things that need to stay cold. Put them in a cooler, get some ice or ice packs or whatever. And then lastly is just checking to make sure your equipment's good. So big thing is our troop always used the nice big stand-up kitchen stove or outdoor kitchen stoves, whatever you call them, that has like 2 burners. It's just making sure that the flames come out of the burners correctly. There's no holes in your hose, and that your tank of gas is filled. And same thing goes for the smaller backpacking stoves, and just even down to your knives, making sure they're sharp, and all your other cooking tools. You guys want to throw some more in on common mistakes you've come across while camping?
Nope, I think you've knocked it
you
out.
I think you kind of hit just about all the ones I've made mistakes on. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Also, make sure to turn your gas off when you're done cooking. That has happened.
Yeah,
Oh,
be
yeah.
very careful with propane. I have
Penis.
seen people light full stoves on fire because there was a gas leak.
If you're using white gas, I repeat, if you are using white gas, do not let it leak. That stuff blows up. I have watched a scout burn his eyebrows off after I taught him how to do it correctly, which I guess might be partially my fault. But the kid before him did it right, so anyway, that's my rant. Be careful with white gas stoves. Those are kind of popular backpacking stoves. They've gotten less popular, I think. But
yeah,
they were.
they're popular with some of the backpacking stoves.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, just like when you're cooking normally, be careful with your equipment so you don't get hurt.
Just a little comment about those stoves, just a kind of a joke that's also a little darker. We used when we were at NYLT, my team, we were given a white gas stove, and all of us kind of knew the implications of a white gas stove. So he gave it the nickname the Suicide, because the guy who had to carry it was the suicider, because he had to carry a white gas stove in his hands. There was a little bit of an incident, a quote unquote incident, a couple of days earlier where somebody had almost blown themselves up with a white gas stove, so we called them that.
Wait, did you guys?
Yeah, good time.
Did you walk the entire way to your campsite with it in your hands? You didn't put it in your backpack?
Yes.
They're not that dangerous. It's not a ticking bomb. You can turn them off.
I mean, we were also carrying an 8-person tent on somebody's shoulders. So I mean, you know.
Back in the days when we didn't know how to plan our own trips.
Exactly.
And the best part is there was the staff leading us for that, and we still were doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So in our next episode, we are going to be doing another gear guide, but this time it'll be on tents, sleeping bags, and sleeping pads, and other nighttime stuff you need if you need your little teddy bear and pillow. I like a pillow. Anyway, once again, this has been a day for adventure. Get off your butts, go outside, and have a great day.